Hello, everyone, and welcome to our IMA weekly show. I'm Dr. Kat Lindley, and I'm a Senior Fellow and Director of the IMA Fellowship Program. Tonight, we are examining the incentive, prices, and structural barriers that keep America's healthcare system from changing. Informed choice depends on open information. We believe patients deserve transparency, not only about prices, but also about the incentives and evidence that shapes the healthcare decisions. We'll also discuss what it will take to turn reform ideas into practical, real-world solutions. And for this, I'm joined tonight with Dr. Katy Talento. Dr. Talento is a Harvard-trained epidemiologist, naturopathic doctor, and former White House health policy advisor and special assistant to the president. She spent 2 decades inside the healthcare system before leaving to help everyday Americans and employers better understand the healthcare system and navigate it. You can read more of her work at katytalento.com. Katy, thank you for joining us tonight.
So great to be here, Dr. Lindley. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And you guys may not know, but I met Katy a long time ago during Trump 1.0 when she was working very hard for some of the reforms. And also she's been doing that for a very long time. And it's really an honor to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
So let's just kind of dive into it right away. People talk about healthcare reform all the time. Everyone talks about, our healthcare is too expensive. We have Democrats who like the idea of Medicare for all. You have Republicans who more like, competition and choice. So this is discussed constantly in Washington, in corporate boardrooms, around family kitchen tables, because the Americans are paying a huge amount of money for healthcare. But there are so many problems that people don't really address. So let's just kind of start with simple questions. Why does the American healthcare system seem so resistant to meaningful change?
Well, I would say there are many reasons for that, but when someone's salary depends on not changing, they don't change. So that's one. But also, the healthcare industry is the largest spender on lobbying of any other industry, like in the second, third, fourth, fifth industry combined. And there are about 4 or 5 lobbyists in the healthcare industry for every member of Congress, 535 members of Congress. And they are extremely powerful. It's not just about lobbying, it's about campaign donations. So all those interests, all those industries and the trade groups that they are part of and the PACs that they establish, they write huge checks. And that's not to suggest that all politicians are bought and paid for or their staff are bought and paid for. I actually don't totally think that, not entirely. It's more that the way the corruption works, if you want to call it that, is if you've got a campaign donor who calls and wants a meeting or wants to talk to the boss or the senator or the president or whoever, what it means is they get the meeting. They get a call back, right? As opposed to if you call and want a meeting, like, you'll go through this regular scheduling process. You may or may not get your meeting. You'll probably wind up with the junior staffer, right? So it just gets you access, and the access doesn't necessarily mean anything like openly corrupt. What it means is, because all Americans should have access, there's nothing necessarily wrong with having access. The issue is they get to frame the issue first for the policymaker or the staff. So I'll, for many years when I was a staffer, Republican staffers were like pro industry, whatever. And so for instance, we would get these like PBMs coming to us and giving us their talking points that we are lowering prices for everybody and premiums are lower because of us. But for us, premiums would go up. And I didn't know better. I just thought, oh, that makes sense. Okay. And so they would get their talking points in front of me first. So that when patients don't really have effective lobbying groups anyway, nor do employers. And to be honest, most provider groups aren't very effective either. But the industries are very effective. And so like I believe that first because I knew them at that point. Maybe I'd been to a steak dinner. We were a little friendly. It's not that I was openly corrupt. It's that I just didn't know better and I had someone feeding me information that framed an issue for me. So that's the main reason is the access and the money. It just buys you the opportunity to frame an issue first. And all you need to do is frame it enough that it raises questions in the policymaker's mind. So like you might have a bunch of patients or employers clamoring out there in the world for change, and maybe they rally behind some bill. They never do. They're never that organized, but occasionally they do. But you have enough questions now against that bill so that you're conflicted, and healthcare is so complex. Not even those of us in the industry are experts in all aspects of it. We're experts in our little niche, right? Most of us. And so certainly no policy staffers and definitely no elected officials are expert enough to really understand all the incentive streams and misalignments enough to even know who's right and what the right answer is. So that paralysis driven by insecurity causes policymakers to just want to wash their hands and be like, oh, I'll let the committee chairman deal with this, right? The committee chairman who's bought and paid for. So that's kind of, I think, one of the main reasons.
Yeah, and I've kind of experienced that as well, especially during Trump 1.0 when we started meeting on the Hill regarding direct primary care, because President liked the idea of direct primary care because of transparency and competition and all that. And you're right, a lot of healthcare staffers don't really understand the issue, and they trust you that you're going to kind of frame it. They have good faith trust, I would say, but they have to really hear from both sides. And most of the time they don't. They just hear from the industry because they're the ones that have access, money, time. And the doctors and patients really don't have that time. So when you only hear one side of the story, you kind of tend to buy into it a little bit too much. And we kind of learned with PBMs and other things that it's really harmful for the patient. And they're the ones that don't have a voice unless the staffers reach out directly to them, which is not really easy.
No, and people who have jobs and businesses to run are not great at lobbying, right?
Yeah.
And so employers should be. I was always sort of like, why don't employers get their act together? Like they are the much bigger interest, much bigger than the PBM industry or the hospital industry. Like, why aren't they getting their act together? And the answer is like they're focused on making shoes or building cars or like they just, and their trade groups. Another reason is that the business or purchaser trade groups are business trade groups, and so they have all kinds of businesses in their membership, including the healthcare businesses. So like Aetna and like the Blues, they're members of these groups. And so when healthcare issues come up, whether it's for the U.S. Chamber or the Business Roundtable or whatever, when a healthcare question is on the table, they turn to their healthcare industry members to determine the trade group's position, even though that the position of the healthcare members is completely at odds and screws the rest of their membership, right? Their Main Street business membership. But that's why most employer groups are totally ineffective, from the U.S. Chamber to Business Roundtable, National Purchaser Coalition. But like there's one group that's really good, and that's the ERISA Industry Committee. And it's because they take the dollars of those healthcare companies, but they don't let them vote on positions.
Mm-hmm. And I think one reason that change is difficult because the system itself is paid to manage the illness, not to cure things. So I think there is this, never-ending loop between the insurers, the pharmacy benefit managers, the other people who depend on the system to kind of propagate. I would say, uh, medicine is easy, but healthcare is such a bureaucracy that keeps on feeding itself. It's kind of hard to escape it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Everyone in the industry, except the independent docs, everyone in the industry, and not even all the independent docs, the independent primary care docs, all of them except independent primary care docs do better when there are patients who are sick for life and need high
Mhm.
price stuff done to them or bought for them. And so when you've got that kind of incentive, nobody's paid to keep nobody benefits when patients are well, except people on a Netflix subscription, right? People on the
Yeah.
monthly membership. So it's just really, and that's even though all the people in those industries, the vast majority of the providers are like good people in it who went into it for the right reasons. They would be totally offended by me saying that they are financially motivated or that financial incentives matter to them. But evidence after study have shown that financial incentives, in fact, influence how systems work. So systems are made up of people.
Yeah, and it's really easy to blame the insurance companies and again PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers and stuff. But actually, in my opinion, someone that needs to be blamed is our government. It's our Center for Medicare and Medicaid. They're the ones that put these protocols and make doctors, click on this box, make sure if they have this diagnosis, they're on this medication, that you get these labs done. There is no thinking involved in trying to actually make the patient better. It's just this endless loop of clicking the box, make sure that, after the meetings with PBMs, they discuss if you're on diabetes, you have to be on this medication. And if they're not getting paid for it. It's really, people don't understand the depth of the corruption on every level, whether it's our government, the private insurances, the labs, radiology, all of those institutions are kind of working together at making us sick and not really, they don't want us to be healthy because there is no incentive on anyone being healthy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's you're right that ultimately, like government, nobody is like coming to save us from government,
Yeah.
and we really kind of wish they would. But Medicare, when Medicare was designed, it's still operating on a 1960s model. It's just a fee for service. It's not even like insurance fee for service, where at least they're trying to negotiate prices. It's just they'll pay. It's just a blank check, and so of course providers do better in Medicare if they just like do more stuff to someone, not cure them or
Mhm.
get them healthy. So yeah, it's bad. And I would say that if you try to change Medicare, again, you're going up against the local hospital is the biggest employer in any congressional district. And so you try to take on those guys. The people who sit on the boards of those hospitals are all friends with the elected officials. And so again, who is in these politicians' ear is never, it's just this asymmetry of power. You've got people whose entire existential interest, they have an existential interest, the healthcare industries in getting their will done by government. And so they throw everything they have at it. Whereas patients and even docs have like a important but marginal interest. And so there's this asymmetry of power. You've got people who are existentially motivated versus people who are like just harassed and annoyed all day. And that's so we don't organize as well, on the purchaser or the provider side. And by provider, I mean doctor side. I don't mean hospital side. Doctors.
Yeah, and when you were saying we're getting bothered all day, I had to deal with two prior authorizations recently, and it is a pain for sure.
Yeah,
Okay,
and the prior
so
authorizations, I mean, I build health plans for employers, right? And so
mhm,
we use prior authorizations to identify for our nurse navigators heads up, someone has an issue, so that we can reach out to them and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, how can we help you? How
Mhm.
can we steer you to high quality, low cost sites of care, independently owned facilities and doctors rather than hospital owned? Like, we're using prior authorizations for a purpose that is actually in the patient's interest, both financial and clinical interest. But and I think that's how prior authorizations, were born. I think that's why they were originally born, not just
Mhm.
to like, ruin everyone's lives. And, but they certainly, from the carrier's perspective, when carriers are imposing them, it's a tool that they feel like they have to use. But it is so brutal. It is so brutal.
It is, and it delays care, which is really
Yeah.
frustrating for the patient and the doctor.
Yeah.
So, what do you think the role is of the growing burden of chronic illness right now? Because that's really one of our biggest issues. And I think Secretary Kennedy has tried to address not only the chronic illness in elderly, which we're definitely seeing with the Medicare, but we're seeing it in younger and younger generations. And it's creating this huge burden on our industry. And then I think that's one of the reasons there's always this talk of, I call it Medicare for all, but like, socialized healthcare, because they're like, oh, that's going to solve the problem. But in my opinion, that's going to make the problem worse. What do you think can be really done to kind of lift some of the burden that we're feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I've written about this recently a lot, is that really the only way to lower healthcare prices and the cost of healthcare is to need less healthcare. Like, we can talk all day long about cutting out the middlemen and, the whack-a-mole that I play in my business of, like, trying to end run and direct contract and
Mhm.
maybe RBP, or, like all the different, cash pay, all the tools we're trying. But really, people are so darn sick, and every new group that I get is like sicker than I've ever seen. And, not to mention that hospitals are now rolling out AI in the exam rooms. And so the upcoding that we're seeing, and the like just increase in claims costs for no apparent reason. I mean, we're seeing stop loss carriers who are finding it so unpredictable. It's not just that like costs are going up. They can prepare for that. It's so unpredictably going up here, not there, for these groups, not that group. And it's not predictable for them. They're fleeing the stop loss market because it's too risky for the stop loss carriers. And so, yeah, I mean, we're all playing whack-a-mole trying to solve the cost problem and bend the cost curve. But the real problem is that we are sicker, fatter, sadder, more anxious, more infertile than ever in human history. And yet we are more medicated and more treated than ever in human history. So, if we don't radically take agency, and I mean, it doesn't have to be everyone, but if like a healthy minority of us really took radical agency over our health, and I mean the people that don't have major health issues yet, we'll talk about those with chronic illness in a sec, but the people who don't have health issues yet, if like half of us could actually just start taking radical agency to prevent ourselves from becoming chronically ill, that would make a huge difference in the cost curve. And for the chronically ill who are already sick, just because you're already sick in one area, maybe it's diabetes or you have some MSK pain or whatever, doesn't mean that like the rest of your body has to be like subject to your hospital care team, right? The next thing that goes wrong, like the rest of your health, the other specialties that maybe you might be seeing in 3 years don't have to be seen if you would start taking care of yourself now. And I do think that like when we talk about, well, how can we change this from a policy level? And the answer is, we cannot entirely, right? These are individual agency questions. However, I am encouraged that like it's going mainstream to talk about whole food and raw milk and flipping the food pyramid. And I mean, honestly, flipping the food pyramid, rewriting the dietary guidelines, that has an impact, a direct impact on the food that is being consumed by about 40 million people who are in institutional settings, nursing homes, prisons, schools, at military facilities. So that's like people who are completely dependent on someone else to feed them, and they're being fed like the base of that food pyramid's all processed carbs. So now that that's flipped, they have to change how those people are fed. So that's, somewhat encouraging. Hospitals too. Hospitals go by the dietary guidelines, which is absolute like catastrophe, the menus at hospitals. So I do think that we are seeing not only policy changes, which are important, but the culture around these things is starting to change because of the dialogue happening from our leaders, which is the first time that's ever happened. Not the first time. I mean, Michelle Obama talked about this as well, and I'm sure others. But like, this is really important, and it has to happen. It's like not at all sufficient, but it is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and I think at some point, the administration is going to have a serious, honest conversation about what has happened during the pandemic as well. The vaccine adverse events that we're seeing, going to have to start addressing those. And I think they're trying. You have to give them a little credit. And glyphosate, right? They did try, but that bill giving them immunity is not good. But then EPA can do the job on their end to change some of these things. At least there is a conversation that's willing to be had, and we're not running away from it like we have in the past. So, like you said, and then a good thing is I would say that the public themselves are taking a lot of responsibility on their own. A lot of people are choosing to eat healthier, exercise, and reduce their stress and things like that. So hopefully we'll see more, good movement in the right direction. So one thing that we do need to address is this elephant in the room, and it is the cost of healthcare. The insurance premiums are rising, deductibles are rising. You have healthy families who essentially are paying $20,000, $30,000 a year to cover their family in case there is an emergency. And I think that those conversations need to be had. Like you said, do we really need all of this just in case we have an emergency? So how should risk and benefits be communicated to the patient to actually understand this environment when they're trying? Because, I know you like the health sharing ministries. They work sometimes for patients because they can give them a little break on the cost, and either get, insurance through the employers. But then you have some self-pays who are kind of, well, I'm healthy. I don't really need to go see the doctor. I just want to have some kind of emergency thing in the background. How do you kind of have these conversations with the public on what's best for their families?
I think we spend a lot of oxygen in Washington talking about the individual market and the ACA and whether healthcare sharing might be better or cash pay might be better or HSAs for that community or whatever might be better. But I don't think like we can change that market all we want. We can convince people that, they need off-exchange catastrophic plans and HSAs and DPC and like we can, or healthcare sharing, like we could dramatically change that market of 20 million people, and it wouldn't change a darn thing for everyone else. If we don't talk about the people who are covered by employer-sponsored insurance, 180 million people, we will change nothing. So when you're talking about the risk calculus, the risk benefit calculus that employees and their families are making, what their costs are their employee contribution versus a healthcare sharing versus cash versus a catastrophic plan. Why on earth would they not elect coverage from their employer when it's cheaper for them to have that way overpriced, way overcovered coverage? It's cheaper for them to have that coverage than to go out into the market and like get right size insurance for themselves and their families. And so like even an off exchange plan that's kind of catastrophic is going to be more expensive than their employee contribution. Meanwhile, their employer is paying like 3x that for them to be covered. And so the price of care is not changed at all because those premiums on, like if I as an individual employee am paying $200 out of my payroll deductions every month, but my employer is paying on average $600 for me, between the two of us, it's an $800 premium a month. Like I'm doing nothing to reduce healthcare costs when I could pay $250 at a healthcare sharing ministry. But why would I? I get less benefit there, and it's more expensive than my employer plan. So I think that's the real problem here is the employers have to create a product, an offering that is good for their sickest patients, their sickest workers, and so they have to pay that for everybody, which is cray, right? Because they're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of health status. So they can't say, if you're sick and you really need more coverage, we will pay more for you. If you're healthy, we won't pay more for you. Like, they're not allowed to do that, of course. And so, and it wouldn't work actuarially for them to do that. And so I really think that the answer here is what I call school choice for healthcare. So we've talked about this in the individual market, but if we do it only in that market, it won't change anything, which we really need to change. So I say, let every employer, well, really, any dollar that a third party is paying for a patient should be allowed to be put in a patient's account, their own account, so that they can go buy their own care, whether that's coverage, whether it's ACA coverage, non-ACA coverage, whether it's a healthcare sharing ministry, whether it's direct primary care, whether it's other types of direct care, whether it's just cash, whether it's organic food, regenerative food, like, I don't care. It's your money for healthcare. You can spend it tax-free on whatever you want. And that means your employer. So that employer of mine who's paying $600 for me can put $600 instead into an account for me. And I can go do whatever I want with that as long as it meets the IRS definition of health spending. Okay. So that's what I recommend. If not every employer would do that, would like take advantage of that, but a lot of them want out of the healthcare business. You know, they don't want to be the ones making all the coverage choices for their people. They're happy to just turn over some cash to their people and not have to run a health plan. And so I think a good chunk of them, maybe half of them, maybe more, would get out, would just put money in people's accounts. And then you have that entire, like, so much of that big employer market now in the individual market. Then you'd have a really thriving individual market, because right now the individual market is sicker, older, fatter. It's very hard to insure those people. So there's those people on one end of the continuum who really need like subsidized ACA plans, very rich ACA plans. And then you have everyone else who's like super young, healthy, and doesn't think insurance is a good value. And so like those bifurcated people are in the individual market. If we threw half of all the employed people into the individual market too, then you'd have all this like flourishing of products for them, right? Hey, we're going to send you an organic food box every week. We're going to put you in a health coaching program, to a weight loss program, diabetes specific coverage, asthma specific coverage. You don't have to get a family plan. You can put your kid on this plan and your wife on that plan. And so that's the world that I imagine. And it would basically just turn all those federal dollars, so Medicare, Medicaid, ACA subsidies, DOD TRICARE subsidies, employer subsidies, grandpa want to give you money for your health plan, mom and dad want to put you on a health plan, all that money, a church wants to crowdfund and raise money for their pastor, any money that anyone else wants to give anybody else for money, for healthcare, can be put into an account instead, a tax-free account. So that's where I'm at. And that's what I think. I mean, it's a big, bold idea, but it's also the president's idea. He was tweeting about this last fall, and he just was whining about it today, about like, let's take money away from the big bad insurance companies and give it back to the people. That is what I'm talking about, essentially. And so I think the president is on board. And the real barrier here, I'll just tell you right now, is Senator John Thune and the United States Senate. So the House wants to go big and bold. Lots of them do. I think Speaker Johnson would be for it. I think the White House, although their staff are not particularly motivated or competent to drive a legislative agenda from the White House, but the Senate has put their foot down. They do not want to do anything big. They don't want to do anything in reconciliation that would only take 51 votes. They don't want to do anything before the midterms. So they're sort of in a civil war right now over at the Capitol. I don't know what's going to happen there, but that's what I think would really be an important innovation to change some of the market incentives that are driving the status quo today.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And actually, I think there is a movement in some kind of mid-level employers who want to do that, who would rather give their employees a certain amount of money and say, go out in the big bad world, look what you need, what your family needs. And actually, someone posted here, market without transparency is nonsense. And that's true. But then we have president who not only in the Trump 1.0, as I like to call it, had the transparency executive order where the hospital had to put their prices, but he's also reinstated that order right now. So I think we need to put a little bit more pressure on the industry to start putting these honest prices, because you and I both know that the CBC, which is complete blood count, you can get it for $2.25 cash price,
Right.
and where the insurance is billing $150.
It's crazy.
So
and
it's crazy.
You're exactly right, Dr. Lindley. I was in charge of that transparency initiative. I had to fight a lot of free market conservatives inside the White House and the administration to get that through, because they viewed it as regulatory meddling in private industry, between private contracts between insurers and doctors and hospitals, and we shouldn't make them post the terms of their private contracts. And I said, okay, except the people paying according to those terms are not parties to the contract, so screw them.
Yeah.
So we did do price transparency. To be fair, I was thrilled, relieved, shocked that the Biden administration actually doubled down on price transparency. They did not reverse it, except on the drugs. The PPMs got to them. But on the medical side, they did not reverse it. They actually beefed up the enforcement penalties, which frankly were a joke in the first term. They beefed those up a lot. I was thrilled to see that. But what has happened most recently is the secretary and Dr. Oz have come out about, we're going to get serious about enforcement. So that's good. However, I think a lot of people would say, I constantly hear like, price transparency won't change anything. People can't afford healthcare. And I would argue the initial audience, like the audience today and probably for the next 5 years, for transparent prices is not patients. It's employers and healthcare sharing ministries and larger purchasers of care, and the government, taxpayers, for Medicare and Medicaid. And so I actually, obviously, price transparency is not sufficient to change the market. However, it is necessary to change the market. And so like, we're using it in my business for employers. We're using it to figure out what to offer when we're offering a cash price, what to negotiate when we're doing a direct contract with a hospital system or a doctor, or some other facility. We use it to figure out like, hey, is this drug a decent price, or should we try to source it from somewhere else, or what should we do? And so, it's not great. Not everybody's doing a great job with transparency. Not everybody's complying well, but by gosh, it is better than nothing. And, if you're an employer that doesn't have great claims history, like you don't have your own claims history because maybe you were fully insured and you didn't get your claims, or maybe like your carrier is playing games and won't give you your claims, which is a real problem, then you don't know what you've paid for these things. So you need to know what others have paid for these things using price transparency files, and that can be helpful. There are vendors out there that are making it easier to use those files. I think one day when we have a broader cash market, a broader individual market, then patients will start using. But I do think that the solution to getting to that competitive cash market that we all dream about, and is sort of our utopia that we all dream of, is the only way to get there is if employers and government start paying cash. Well, they can't pay cash right now for a variety of reasons. One, the contracts that employers and that hospitals and doctors have with networks. So I, as an employer, have a network contract to use the network. The employers and doctors, of course, the doctors and hospitals also have their own to be paid by the insurer. So we all have our contracts with the network. The network does not let us come together and cut the network out, right? And just like say, hey, you doc, what do you want, right? So we have to send our patients into you with like, don't show your ID card, don't show that network logo, or like, here's a voucher, because so that you, doctor, whoever doctor has like plausible deniability that like you're not violating your Cigna contract. So we have to play all these games. And I would argue that provisions in those contracts that we both have are anti-competitive and illegal. And I think that like you can't prevent people from seeking better pricing outside of you. Like, no. So if FTC or DOJ antitrust division would come after those network provisions the way they are starting to come after some other types of like shenanigans, hospital shenanigan contracts with networks, I am confident that if those provisions were ruled illegal, we could start to see independent TPAs scaling cash pay at a dramatic rate. So, like all my clients, we use an independent TPA. We fire the carriers and we fire the PBM. We use an independent, and I'm sorry, I'm using acronyms, third party administrator, the one that you send the claims to, and that we process the claims and get you paid. That TPA is, most of them don't have the capability to pay you cash. It's just because nobody really has paid cash because our network contracts prevent it. But if they did allow it, those contracts allowed it, then we would scale cash pay to pay you day of or before. You get paid all in. You wouldn't have to chase a patient. That's how because the cash pay market right now is only among like rich moguls and maybe people who have really high deductibles and lots of money in their HSA. Like it's not very many people. And so that market isn't really scaling, even though there are all these independent docs out there that like would love for that market to scale, but it's not really scaling until the employers get involved or the government programs get involved. And so we can't do that as long as those illegal provisions are in contracts.
I'm sorry, it just makes me laugh listening to this conversation because it's so true. Even just getting MRI, you can pay cash prices so much cheaper than even using your insurance and deductible and everything else. And it's ridiculous that patients has to hide the fact that they actually have insurance because it's not legal to show, to get cash price if you have insurance. We have come so far in some ways, but like we have so much work to do in others. It's a little bit frustrating.
But I would argue that is such a simple policy fix. All DOJ has to do is like go after one case, right? Like they went
Yeah.
after Ohio Health and New York Pres over these like outrageous network contracts that they were like forcing you to take, like forcing every plan to take some crap hospital if they want any of the hospitals in the system. Anti-competitive insanity. All DOJ has to do is do the same thing with this provision and it would be over. Now, also, like a really bright light of hope is the Consolidated Appropriations Act of this year, 2026, came out with like unbelievably good policy, like best policy I've ever seen. I love to like poop all over Congress, but like, wow, was I impressed. And so they are going to burn down, this law will burn down the PBM business model. But it's not just like it's 100 pages of like awesome PBM policy. And then at the very end, they're like, yeah, and TPAs and carriers too. I was like, wait, what? So, like, it really prevents a bunch of outside kickbacks, conflicted arrangements with other middlemen and like layers of middlemen. All that's going to be prohibited transactions under ERISA. I saw a question in the chat. Someone was like, what's ERISA? ERISA is the federal law that governs employer-sponsored plans, which is like half the country. So it's not HHS that's regulating those plans. It's actually Department of Labor, and this is the law that does it. And so like the business model of every industry is going to be a prohibited transaction under ERISA under this law. And I think this law will become effective around mid 2028. It's not very clear in the law, in the actual statute, but it'll, based on what they do say, it'll probably, my guess is mid 28 if I had to guess. So that's amazing. We'll see how it gets watered down. Someone just asked, what law? Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2026 is basically the omnibus funding bill, because that's the only bill that ever passes Congress is the appropriations. Like the showdown every year is really over the funding the government. So we used to pass like 12 laws every year funding different departments of the government. Now nobody does that because they just throw it all into one giant omnibus appropriations bill every year. And that bill is a subject of like the showdown shenanigans every year. And then the four corners of the Congress get together behind in some back room and they cook up the omnibus rather than having like regular order and debate and committees and hearings. Like Congress is totally broken. But so they cook this bill up every year. And you'll recall that in 2021, that's where we got the broker transparency. That's where we got the gag clause attestations. So really good policy. The No Surprises Act, which is kind of a mixed bag, kind of good for patients, but not so great for plans or docs. So we got some good reforms in 2021 in that big omnibus. 2026 blows them all away. It's amazing. And I think it's like this nuclear bomb that people don't really realize, but it's very worth looking into if you haven't. Ask ChatGPT to tell you all about it.
So we're kind of towards the end of the discussion. What is your maybe advice for a regular family who is trying to navigate this crazy world of healthcare? I hear a lot of pushback how medicine, it's not good. I don't trust doctors. I don't trust hospitals. There's a lot of mistrust that has been created for the past 5, 6 years, but it's still, I would say, the best healthcare in the world, despite the fact that we have a lot of growing to do. What are your few, words of advice on how to navigate it?
Oh yeah, that's such a great, such a great question. I think if you've got a family that's generally healthy, I would look for, it may cost you a little more to retain your agency and your dignity. But I would say elect out of your employer coverage. And if you're healthy, instead get a sort of catastrophic healthcare sharing ministry plan or program, rather. They're not really plans. Get yourself into a healthcare sharing ministry or healthcare sharing organization, and for your like emergency needs, right? It's the way like insurance used to be, right? Where we would just use it for catastrophic stuff, like when our car gets in a wreck, when our body gets in a wreck. We wouldn't use it for the oil changes and the, gas fill ups every week, but now that's what insurance is. So health insurance. So I would say get that for your catastrophic needs. And then if you've got pediatrics or if you've got any kind of ongoing need at all, obviously buy direct primary care. If you don't, because I'm a big proponent of direct primary care. We put free DPC for our employees on every plan that we run. And yet I myself don't have DPC. And I'll tell you why, because I'm totally healthy. It's just not a value prop for me, right? So if you're totally healthy, and then maybe you don't need DPC, but you need to know a neighborhood doctor, or you need to be very good friends with a doctor somewhere else who will treat you virtually, who's licensed to treat you virtually if something comes up that's not an emergency, but that is important enough for you to see a doctor for. You need to get to know them. You need to be friends with them. You need to look at that frontline list and find the one in your state, right? So we need to find those guys, the ones that are going to let us have, that might, write us the proper exemption if we qualify legally for an exemption. We need, for our kids for school or for us for work or whatever. You need to have someone who can get you ivermectin if you need it or whatever, who's willing to be open-minded about older medicines and also willing to work with your health coach or your homeopath or your naturopath, if that's an avenue that you choose. But I would also explore alternative types of providers too. Chiropractors, naturopaths. I prefer the unlicensed kind of naturopaths because the licensed ones are usually sort of adjacent to some oncology practice or something usually. But although they have benefits too. They can prescribe if you need it. So you got to find your people. There's really no way to avoid finding your people. And you do that by in-person meetups and whatever with like-minded people. So if you find your people, and that includes your healthcare, doctors and practitioner people, then when you need something, you have someone to call. And, there's always an urgent care for truly, truly urgent stuff. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that in my family, I really try to stay out of the medical system. But every once in a while I need it, or you're going through menopause, you want to explore some HRT, right? Or your daughter needs reproductive restorative medicine, or restorative reproductive medicine. Everyone has a need at some point. So that's really my best advice, is explore alternative, because even if you have to pay a little more for that healthcare sharing ministry instead of your employer's plan, or certainly, your ACA plan, the agency, the autonomy, the power that you have to be out of that such gross broken system with all these incentives to put you through the medical factory, that's worth it. To me, that's worth extra money. So that's my best advice. My goodness, it's not great.
No, I agree. That's essentially my advice as well. But it first starts
And to
at
stay
home. I always
healthy.
say, yeah, exactly.
And to stay healthy,
Starts with
eat
you.
real food.
Yes. Go
Move,
to the
get
gym,
sunlight.
even if you don't like it.
That's
Exactly. I
right.
agree.
That's right. Yeah.
Kelly, we're ready for you.
That's great. Well, thank you for such a great, encouraging discussion. Dr. Talento, one thing I think some of the people in the chat don't realize is exactly what was your role in Trump's administration. Could you talk about that? I know I got to know your good work when you did your coming out, I'll call it your coming out Substack, and shared, a lot of information. I know Kat's known you for much longer, but that might be helpful for those that are watching tonight.
Yeah, sure. So I was basically the lead health advisor on the Domestic Policy Council in the White House in the first Trump term. I left right before COVID, thanks be to God. Like I have enough on my conscience, I didn't need that. But yeah, so I was in charge of the multi-trillion dollar federal health expenditures and HHS, DOL to the extent that it applies to employer health plan, some VA issues, medical VA issues, some medical DoD issues, and actually global health too. They didn't have it, the National Security Council, they didn't have any political people in charge of global health. So when the global health folks needed political navigation, they called me. So I was in charge of a lot. But it's not like I actually did all that work. I was there to coordinate, making sure that two things, making sure the president's agenda got enacted by the agencies. So sometimes I would have to hold the gun to their heads and make them do his agenda. I was there to protect the agencies who were doing the right thing from all the blowback that they'd get. Because what happens when you do the right thing? Well, the winners and losers in industry start calling the White House. And so I was there to protect them and Mr. President, remember, you campaign on this, don't fire the FDA commissioner, right? So, and then also, so that's sort of the proactive stuff, but then you also have just the trains running every day produce thousands and thousands of regulatory pages, and some political eyeballs have to review those, and they would come across my desk, but I was in back-to-back meetings all day, so I would get maybe an hour at most two every day to read stuff that I was supposed to be reviewing. I did not get to it all. There were things that happened under my nose that I couldn't get to or that weren't even sent to me, like homeopathy got completely screwed up while I was there and it was never sent to my desk. So I think that it's too big a job for anyone. And we rely on, there's a team of people. There's a health person at OMB. There's a health person at OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. There's a health person at the National Economic Council. There's a health person who works communications, a health person who works with the governors. There's a kind of a team of people, but I was the policy lead. And so I worked very closely with the HHS political leadership too.
And you talked a lot about just the focus on prevention and wellness overall is driving. Was that something that you had as a philosophy back in your days of administration, or was that something as you left you came to find the importance of?
Oh my gosh, I was I was a personal health disaster. No. And this is why Dr. Lindley, you were talking about the carnage of COVID on our health, but also the blessing of COVID for so many of us. COVID woke me up watching from the outside the absolute S show of that. And I was like, I don't think this scientific enterprise is as buttoned up as I thought it was. Wait a minute. I feel like maybe the white coats are a religious cult and I've been part of it. So I really had my eyes opened. I was pro-vaccine. I thought vaccines were the gold standard of public health interventions. I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist. I thought global respiratory disease popping off, cool, this is awesome. We should do lockdowns. I was on board. And in fact, the president was running for re-election at that time in 2020. And there was nobody on the outside of the government who could go on TV and defend his COVID response. So the campaign begged me to do it. So I was defending the COVID response during 2020. And so, yeah, it got really bad under Biden, but it wasn't great under Trump either. And so, anyway, so I woke up really in that latter half of 2020 and especially during 21 when I saw the FDA approval of the COVID vaccine that didn't exist and the EUA extension of the COVID vaccine that did exist. And there was this weird bait.
So it sounds like those elements there were red flags to you, especially with your background. And then that got you to dive in and learn more. And then you investigated it for yourself, which even the consumers, I'm a consumer. That's how I learned about FLCCC at the time and now IMA.
Same. I
myself.
was
It
like,
was just
maybe
like, this isn't
ivermectin.
adding up. It's not making sense. And then now
Yeah.
I've been on this journey for 5 years with all these incredible doctors. So,
Right. Same thing. The frontline docs were like
mhm.
our lifeline. I was like my neighborhood's underground railroad to like hydroxychloroquine um but people like it took me a while to go full once you get down the
So
rabbit hole,
you
you're like
discovered the concerns, then you looked at some of the early therapies early on, and then you just went down the rabbit hole with the rest of
keep
us.
going down it. I mean, you question the moon landing before, in 5 minutes, you're like, did 9/11 happen? So, but yes, I went down all the rabbit holes and I saw like, nobody's coming to save us. The government is out to get us. We have to take care of our own health. Why haven't I taken care of my own health? Also, my sister passed away in 2019 of colorectal cancer. She was 39. And that was obviously like the worst thing that ever happened to me and my family.
Mhm.
And so I was like, that sure as hell isn't going to happen to me. And I was like, what does it take for that to not happen to me? And so that's when I started studying holistic health and I became a naturopath. And so yeah, I'm grateful for COVID, thank God. But I mean, many people have been so harmed by it.
I
Tomorrow I'm
just know so
talking to
many
the vaccine.
people and
Yeah.
that follow us and watch our educational resources are like-minded. One question, and I don't even know if you had this experience or not, but uh, pit- um Patriot 1776 is on Rumble asked, and they're interested in finding out, did you work actually with Dr. Fauci and Bricks? And did you have any interactions with them? What were your thoughts on them? It sounds like you're a little bit outside of the campaign and maybe helping from a communication standpoint.
So Debbie Burks and I were very friendly because my background is in HIV AIDS and I cared very deeply about global AIDS and had been part of the President Bush's global AIDS program and the legislation that created it and had been involved in that for many years. So when she became the head of the global AIDS program, she and I were,
Mhm.
often working together collaboratively. I liked her. I respected her. I thought she was totally competent. And I thought it was a great thing when she was appointed to run the COVID response at the White House. I was like, oh, phew, thank God someone's there if I can't be. Um, and then Dr. Fauci, nobody likes. Like over the years, he's like notorious in Washington. Everyone hates him. But so I like interacted with him a little bit when I had to, but we weren't friendly by any means. I will say that it was my job in the first Trump administration. Bobby Kennedy had asked for a vaccine safety commission. He
Mhm.
and the president were acquaintances, and sometime during transition or the campaign, the president had agreed to like get this vaccine safety commission going. So in 2017, we like roll up in the White House, and Kennedy starts calling. He wants his commission, and I was like, we can't have this like anti-vax nonsense coming out of the White House. Like what? So I actually did call Fauci and
Mhm.
Dr. Collins at the NIH and was like, hey, you guys take this crazy meeting. We can't have him at the White House. Anyway, so like I have done a lot of self-flagellation about that, public
Mhm.
apologies, private apologies to Secretary Kennedy. So it's really bad. That was not my proudest moment at all. But I didn't know, I thought kids would die if we had like anti-vax, messaging. So
Well, I think that's so many. And actually, it kind of goes into another question that Ellen asked. She said, do you have a sense of approximately how many insiders are being fed, that she's saying corrupt information or inaccurate information? Because again, you're going to people who should be trusted, who are not, as you do your own inquiry. Because not everyone can go down and spend all this time going down all these rabbit holes to find out the truth. So that's the whole thing about trust right now. It's been so shattered.
well, in the
COVID
internet
kind of put a
age,
puncture, COVID put a punctuation on that for sure.
it
To your
really
point.
did. And I mean, that combined with the internet age, where like
Hmm.
we're just in our information silos. And if you're not in a certain silo, you will never hear certain things. Or if you do hear about it, it's only to defame them and delegitimize them. So I don't know if there's an answer. We're all going to have to like become critical thinkers and learn how to kick the tires on things. I think the like absolute life skill of the future will be kicking the tires on what AI tells you to try to, because you can actually get the truth out of AI, but you have to like push it in the right ways. You have to stay a critical thinker so that you can, debate
Hmm.
AI effectively to get the truth out of it. So I think we're all kind of on our own there. And when it comes to medical information, we have to figure it out ourselves. No, like we have to be our
Hmm.
own primary care provider who assemble, we must quarterback our own team, our own care team, but we're our primary care provider and we invite other types of practitioners onto our care team. And we have to like pray and like trust the spirit leading us in our lives, because it is hard to discern the truth if you're not some sort of expert. And if you are an expert, it's even harder to discern the truth.
Well, and I know part of what we're trying to do at IMA is build this referral network, this trusted referral network with people that are like-minded, share like-minded values, and very much focus on, I'll call it patient empowerment, and just challenge people to really get to know this yourself, have your own opinion. Don't just wait for that doctor to tell you. And if you're not comfortable with a doctor, I think you talked about this earlier, then find a new one. Like if they're not a good match for you, and I think that's hard because you're not used to shopping. But in a way, you can shop, even if you're more restricted under an insurance plan, you can still look for others that might be covered in that particular area.
That's right. And a doctor's appointment doesn't cost that much. You can go out of network. Your plan will reimburse
Right.
you for something of it. It's part of it, as an out of network visit. So I do think it's very hard for most people to be confrontational with someone in a white coat or scrubs.
Mhm.
We're so programmed and conditioned to like submit to that authority that even when we're kind of rebellious in our own hearts, the idea of like having a confrontation like sends us all into fight or flight a little bit. We don't like it. Every time I have to go to the hospital with a loved one, I'm like loaded for bear. I'm like high cortisol, my blood pressure's,
Mhm.
like nobody likes that. And so I think and most people aren't as confrontational as me. They're just not gonna. So it's very difficult. And that's why I almost say like, meet your people first before you're sick. Before you're
Right.
sick. Because when you're sick, you're you're vulnerable and you're
And
very
other stresses are
influential.
impacting everything,
That's
correct?
right. So whatever that white coat's going to tell you when you're really scared or in pain and suffering, you just want it to stop. Whatever that white coat tells you, you're just going to go with, and then you'll be in the factory on the assembly line. And so find your people first and know who you trust first, and only go there when you need it.
I feel like there could be a whole webcast discussion just on incentives. So one of the questions that Olga asked is, help, maybe if you could give you and Kat could give a couple examples of just the more perverse incentives that are driven from insurance and unnecessary tests and treatments. And I don't know where consumers have a voice in this. To your point, many are part of corporate plans, with their employer.
Yeah, like one of the grossest is when you get driven. So like, the doctors in the hospital who get bought up by the hospitals, um, for good reasons. Like they didn't go into this to be like, running an uncompetitive business, competing against, a hospital that's able to charge much higher prices with the like same type of practice down the street. So they're bullied by the corporate suits in the hospital headquarters. They're bullied to like keep that patient in the system. Don't let that patient leave the system. We only bought you, primary care doc. We bought you up to be a loss leader for us, to steer those patients to high revenue services, the MRIs, the surgeries, the ortho, the cardiac cath lab. Like if you let any of those patients that you're referring get out of our hospital system and go to, God forbid, an independent, imaging center, an independent ortho, physician-owned surgery center, God forbid, like we're going to take it out of your bonus at the end of the year. So I don't think patients realize that, there's only revenue for everyone if they get stuff done to them, not to make them well. And so it's just, it's so disgusting.
Kat, what are your thoughts to that? I mean, you deal with this day for day with all the patients that you lead care for.
No, she's exactly right. If you work for a system, the system makes you use the system. And I always use the example with Medicare incentives because those bother me even more. If someone is diagnosed with diabetes, there are certain medications that I have to put them on it, whether they have an issue or not. So their blood pressure could be normal, but I still have to put them on ACE inhibitor to protect the kidney, even if I just give them a touch of ACE inhibitor, because if I don't, the reimbursement goes down. Same thing with statin. You have to put them on statin, even if their LDL is already on target, but you have to give them like a touch of it so you hit that incentive. The same thing with the flu vaccine. You have to give them a flu vaccine if you don't. So to me, the insurance incentives are horrible, but the ones that I really dislike even more are the government incentives. So this is Center for Medicare and Medicaid, because they're not looking at this person as a person. They're just looking at it's kind of like epidemiology, right? It's a great idea to do something for the benefit of others. But if you lose the sight of that one individual, then you're harming everyone, because the life of that individual is as important as the lives of 5,000 people. And I think we lose that in these type of incentives and government, programs and things like that.
And Kat, you even though you're a direct primary care physician, you're still working with people that you like do some of their reimbursements through their insurance as well as pay cash on the side, right?
Yeah, like if you have a DPC doctor, everything that should get done outside of the DPC, so whether it's
Right.
labs or radiology, medication, everything's really covered by your insurance, because we maintain our licenses and our government contracts. So everything is covered and there's no really issues there. It's just the payment with the doctor that's different. And, I read the chat all the time, and some people do complain that DPC doctors can be expensive, and some are, but some are not. Like my prices are on the website, you can see them. I honestly cannot go cheaper than that, but I like it because it allows me to have a relationship with my patients. And I think what Katy said is one of the most important things, and I hope everyone has heard it. You want to find your team before you get sick.
Right.
And you want to trust your team. So if there are times when I'll tell my patients that they need to do something they don't like, but they know if I said it, we have this trust relationship that I really think they have to do it, even if they don't like it and I don't like it. So it's important to find the team before the hour of need, because when you have that hour of need, you want to know that you have someone who's in your corner.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, and I know we're at the top of the hour here and appreciate the really, great discussion. Any final thoughts either of you would like to share for tonight?
I'm good.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kat.
No, I was going to say I'm good. The most important thing is another thing that Katy said, and I always say it, but you're in charge of your own health, right?
Yes.
You're the quarterback of the team. You're not the wide receiver. You're not, the running back. You're the quarterback. So you need to be in charge of your health, whether that's financially, whether that's like health wise, but then you have to do the work yourself. The quarterback has to be in prime shape. You have to exercise. I hate exercise. Everyone knows it, but I go to the gym every single day. I try to eat healthy. I don't always succeed, but I try, I do my best. I hydrate and I try to sleep. That one is always hard, but you have to do those things first, and you have to be in charge of your life.
Yeah, I would just pick up on that. And, I have a cat and I have a dog. I always have. Cats have a species specific requirement. They have a species specific diet. They're carnivores. Dogs are omnivores. And, there are species specific requirements for human beings that relate to what we're supposed to eat, how much we're supposed to sleep, when we're supposed to sleep, when we see the sun. That we need spiritual connection. We need human connection. We're tribal pack animals. So there are species specific requirements. And I guarantee you, most of us, myself included, like violate those requirements very regularly. And if you're unhealthy, it's probably because you're violating all of them. And so it's our modern life. If you just live like everybody else, you will die young, right? Like if you live like everyone else, your body is going to break down in ways that it doesn't have to if you are like actually living like a human. So I think so many practitioners are starting to learn to prescribe living like a human. Like you need to get morning sun. You need to sleep 7 hours. Let's work on your sleep hygiene, eating real food that like your great grandparents would recognize as food. So these things are of such high value, and yet none of us want to do them. And I would say we all complain, it's too hard. It's just too hard. I don't have the energy. Well, you had the energy to get through college. You had the energy to get through medical school. You have the energy to like deny yourself during Lent. You have the energy to like save up for Christmas presents. We have the energy to do things that really matter, that we really value. We know that those things actually cost us a lot. There is nothing more valuable than your health. I mean, maybe your spiritual health, it's a longer, but your physical health is such a key to your quality of life. It is worth really investing in and really working hard to improve.
Well, I love that challenge. I know we're really aligned on providing educational resources. So tell us, we've been posting in the chat a bit about how people can follow you. So I know you've got your website, katytalento.com, and we also have allbetter.health are places that people can learn more about you and your team. And then we
Yeah.
posted in the chat your Substack. So where else should people look to follow you?
Yeah, my Substack is Katy Talento. That's all better. KatyTalento.com. But and I write about all this stuff all the time, once a week, so you can subscribe there and get it. But if you're an employer or you want to contract with employers, you can go to allbetter.health. That's my insurance building health plans business. And then if you want a naturopath or homeopath visit with me, or I'm also a birth coach, if you want, home birth preparation, you can go to allbetter.life. That's my naturopath business.
Got it.
Thanks.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for tonight. We'll make sure that try to include those links as well. We usually post a summary of the webcast as well as a video the next day on our website. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you. Really appreciate you guys and everything you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, Kat, I'm going to go ahead and move to closing announcements since we're a little bit short on time right now. So I'll go ahead and jump in, Livio. Thank you so much. All right. Well, the first one next week, we actually have another senior fellow, Dr. JP Saleeby, who will be joining us with Josh Detch. They actually just published a new article in the Independent Medical Journal, and they'll be discussing that as well as general gut health, which is always an important topic that we get lots of questions out about it as well. And then the next item on our academy, don't forget, if you're a healthcare professional, the IMA conference lectures are all posted in the new IMA Academy portal. You find it at academy.imahealth.org. And you can go ahead /for courses, but you see on the main page, you can actually earn 12 CME credits, accreditation, if you're a professional. And if you're not professional and the credits aren't important to you, they're all available for open access. So that's something that even, I'll call it enthusiasts that aren't professionals would get great value out of. So go ahead and check that out. And then the next item is, I think it really ties nicely into the discussion that we had with Dr. Talento and Lindley tonight. But Dr. Joseph Varone authored a great new op-ed just published at the Brownstone Institute on the reflex to prescribe. He discusses the increasing tendency to act reflexively rather than really thoughtfully about the necessity and appropriateness of certain kinds of prescription treatments and medications. So very much aligned to the discussion tonight. And then also medicine at 250 years. We've had this series, we launched it just leading into the celebration of the US's 250 years. And there's a great new article that Lynn Christensen on our team wrote, When Medicine Got It Wrong, Medical Harm, Ethical Failure, and the Need for Humility. So you'll want to check that out. We actually you got the URL on our screen right now, but we've got another 6 articles, 5 video editorials from different IMA senior fellows that are all looking back at what are things that we might want to revive that part of our history, and what things do we want to move forward from as well. So thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. We're going to end tonight with a video from Dr. Christina Carmen. This is her video editorial on medicine at 250 years, and she's going to explore why food, nutrition, and the root cause of care must once again become foundational parts of medicine and what that can mean for health and patients and families. Thanks all for watching tonight. We appreciate your support.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Christina Carmen, and I am an IMA Senior Fellow. And today we're going to talk all about food as medicine. So before medicine became a system of codes and prescriptions, it was actually a kitchen. It was the grandmother's broth when someone was too weak to eat. It was ginger for nausea. It was honey for a cough, rest, warmth, and something nourishing simmering on the stove. For most of human history, food was the first thing we reached for when someone we loved got sick. Not because people had studies, but because they had instinct, intention, attention, and time. Now, not every old remedy was right, and I understand that. Plenty were useless and some were actually harmful. But the instinct beneath them, that the body can be supported, that what we take in matters, that instinct was sound. And somewhere along the way, modern medicine, for all its genuine brilliance, set it aside and set it down. So let's bridge that gap a little bit from kitchen wisdom to this pharmaceutical dependency. As medicine modernized, it gained extraordinary tools, antibiotics, surgery, imaging, emergency care that saved lives every single day and saves lives every single day. I'm not here to romanticize at all about the past or dismiss any of that. But in this rush, actually, towards what was new and measurable, nutrition got pushed to the margins. It became the thing you mentioned actually at the end of a visit, if there was time. Eat better, exercise more, and then out the door you go. And a lot of that is structural. So for most physicians, finishing their entire medical training with only a handful of hours of nutrition education, often less than a single week's worth across years and years of school. This isn't that doctors don't care. It's just that it was a system built that trained them exhaustively on disease and pharmacology and almost not at all on food. So the tools became dormant, and where others were taught, to use that prescription pad, to use the procedure. And for a while, that seemed to work. But then came the chronic disease epidemic, metabolic disease, heart disease, autoimmune conditions, gut disorders, conditions where no single pill that fixes the root. And chronic disease has forced medicine finally to look back at the things that it set down before: food, metabolism, inflammation, the gut, sleep, stress, movement, those fundamental basics. Here's how I think about it in my own practice. Food is not just fuel. Food is information. Every meal is set around a set of instructions your body needs and reads for your immune system, your hormones, your metabolism, your gut bacteria, your brain, your energy, and the level of inflammation. You are quite literally in a conversation with your body several times a day. And this is where I want to be honest about how far we've drifted. We live in a moment where every possible gadget, supplement, and program is at our fingertips. Continuous glucose monitors, $100 supplement stacks, elimination protocols, biohacks. And I use some of these tools with my patients. They absolutely have their place. But we've become very good at chasing the advanced and very, very poor at doing the basic. We'll buy the supplements, but we'll skip the vegetables. We'll track the data, but eat standing over the sink, in the car, in 90 seconds, half distracted, and never actually tasting the food. Because it isn't only what we eat that we've let slip, but it's actually how we eat. We eat too fast to digest well. We eat while stressed, which actually shuts down the very system that's supposed to break food down and absorb it adequately. We graze all day long and never give the body a chance to rest. We've actually stopped cooking, stopped sitting down, stopped eating together. And yes, our food supply is a real problem and has big problems. It's more processed, it's more depleted, more engineered to override our fullness than ever before. That is true and it does matter, but it cannot become the excuse that lets us off the hook for the part that we can do and that we can control. Choose real food most of the time and eating it with some attention. The outcome of letting these basics slip is exactly what fills our clinics. We've become a population that is overfed and undernourished at the same time, taking in more calories than ever before, while running short on fiber, the minerals, the protein, the adequate and actual nourishment the body needs. And the body does keep score. Blood sugar that won't settle, inflammation that won't quiet, guts that won't calm, and energy that never quite returns. So the root cause care asks a different set of questions, not just what is the diagnosis and what is the drug that matches it, but what is missing here? What is in excess? What is inflamed? And what is depleted? And so often the answer lies in the ordinary, unglamorous, everyday, every way a person eats. So from a patient's perspective, I see this constantly. Someone comes in having been told very clearly that they have a disease. What is almost never been told to them is how to rebuild, how to actually get well day by day. They have been handed a label and then sometimes a prescription, but actually not a path. And what they don't need is more shame. They don't need fear or punishment or punishing that this is where they've ended up. What actually they need is a version of food as medicine that actually gives them some hope, something practical, something doable, something that actually fits with the actual human life. That is the quiet power of food. When I sit with a patient and we work on the basics, it's not glamorous at all. The real meals, enough fiber, enough protein, slowing down, eating in a calm state, tending to their gut and to their sleep, something shifts, and it quietly shifts over time, not just in their labs, but in their sense of agency. Because for the first time, they have a role in their own healing. They are not a passive receipt of a diagnosis. They are a participant in their healing. And that changes everything about how recovery feels. So I'll leave you with this. Food as medicine is not fringe. It is not an alternative. It is one of the oldest, most well-established foundations of healing we have, and it belongs at the center of how we treat and prevent chronic disease, not as a footnote, but as a first-line care, sitting right alongside everything modern medicine does well. The future of medicine, I believe, has to begin in the kitchen with the family and the physician back into the same conversation. We don't need to choose between science and nourishment. We need both. Thank you.